Now that 2 days have passed since the 3-hour fracas in Caracas, we can take a step back and examine where the battlefield stands, which is less of a literal field shrouded under a fog of war, and more of a political hellscape. I think that it might help to first go over a timeline of the maneuvering, so we can try to understand what is going on here. And I say try, because, with apologies to Yoda, we lack the information for this to be a do or do not situation. This is because, as far as I can tell, there is no plan. But that itself is a bit of a plan, and it certainly beats the actual plan that the Bush administration planned for Iraq. Now, if that is not a super captivating teaser for a video, I do not know what is, so give me a few minutes to explain what I mean. Saturday at 1 a.m. Florida time, Operation Absolute Resolve began. By 3:30 a.m., it was all over, and Maduro was on his way to New York. Sometime around or before 9 a.m., Reuters, citing 4 unnamed sources, claimed that Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was fleeing to Moscow. At 11 a.m., Trump convened a press conference. Now, I have watched a ton of these over the last year. Trump is usually pretty good at them. Maybe 90% of the minutes that I watch are fairly normal. His career in reality television shows, and sometimes he is legitimately charming. The problem is that when things go off the rails, they really go off the rails. These become the bigger stories, so one would be forgiven if they believe that this is always how his press conferences go. And although this one did not devolve into a shouting match, the whole thing was disorganized, rather than the usual of only a little bit of it being crazy. Moreover, Trump looked tired. Perhaps not surprising if he was up until at least 4:30 a.m. It further did not help that Trump has never been good at walking through the nuances of public policy, yet this was supposed to be the first organized explanation of what was happening. But there were a few issues worth highlighting especially. 1. Trump said that Marco Rubio was in contact with Vice President Rodriguez, quashing that Reuters report. Moreover, Rodriguez said that she was going to cooperate with everything that the United States wanted to do. Except literally at the same time, Rodriguez was on Venezuelan television, demanding the release of Maduro. 2. There was no serious explanation of what the plan would be for long-term governance of Venezuela, given that an opposition party not only exists, but was also the legitimate winner of the previous election. Something involving the opposition was what everyone thought was going to happen, and officials in the Trump administration had also discussed this. But now that was apparently headed to the back burner. The final issue from the press conference was what the U.S. plan would be going forward. The United States would be, quote, running the country, except there are no public U.S. assets on the ground at the moment. And beyond threats to make further interventions, there was no clear articulation of how to accomplish that goal. That left Rubio, Trump's best articulator of the nuance of foreign policy, to go on the Sunday morning political talk shows to try to give both Americans and the rest of the world a clearer roadmap, while also doing a little bit of damage control. The United States would not be running the country in the sense of actually implementing day-to-day operations, as was the case in Iraq, which makes sense given the lack of boots on the ground. However, the United States would be dictating policy, which authorities in Venezuela would have to follow. One slight detail. That, of course, requires having pliable leaders in the country. Part of the strategy here is to use the existing oil blockade for leverage, but you can already see the cracks forming in this plan. The U.S. political left is not pleased with what is happening, and you can see it with their corresponding news outlets using phrases like abduction and kidnapping to describe the operation. The U.S. political right, perhaps unsurprisingly, finds the operation to be more praiseworthy. Catching these subtle differences is easy, of course, with the sponsor of today's video, Ground News. And it is times like these that Ground News' daily briefing is critical. Sure, a lot is happening over in Venezuela, but did you hear about the Berlin power plant that was just sabotaged? Or how Iran is in the second week of nationwide protests? That seems like the type of thing that we might be exploring more in the future. In the meantime, you can stay up to date on your own by going to ground.news/linesonmaps or scanning the QR code on your screen to take a fantastic 40% off a Vantage plan. That is what I use to access all of these features and more. So thanks again to Ground News for their continuing support. The other thing worth highlighting was that Rubio outlined long-term plans. Giving the Venezuelan opposition an opportunity was important, but they still had to deal with the short-term governance of Venezuela. Revisiting Iraq for a second, this is an important point. Both the United States and Venezuela are walking a tightrope at the moment. Having the country descend into chaos, and thus plunging its infrastructure into chaos, is in no one's best interest. But at the risk of making a massive understatement, avoiding that outcome is hard when you have just overthrown the country's leader. Things got more complicated when the Venezuelan military released a loyalty oath to the now acting president of Venezuela, suggesting that there would be a continuity of governance and resistance to the United States. The only suggestion that some consensus may be possible was a late Sunday Telegram post from the now again acting president, though I think too much has been read into it. Quote, "We prioritize moving toward balanced and respectful international relations between the United States and Venezuela. We invite the U.S. government to collaborate with us on an agenda of cooperation, oriented toward shared development within the framework of international law. President Donald Trump, our people and our region deserve peace and dialogue, not war. This has always been President Nicolas Maduro's message, and it is the message of all of Venezuela right now. Venezuela has the right to peace, development, sovereignty, and a future." To me, that sounds less like a concession speech and more like a proposal to revert back to the status quo from 2 days ago. The U.S. action was illegal, Venezuela is a sovereign country, and I will not bow to your demands. Rubio's reaction to this was interesting. He indicated that he does not care about these public communications because they are geared toward her domestic audience. She must also be concerned about coup threats. Rather, Rubio cares about her actions. Gee, where have I heard that one before? So just keep in the back of your mind that she may be trying to eat her cake and have it too, especially with the Financial Times reporting that her brother last year tried to pitch her as a U.S. partner in a transition away from Maduro. Okay, now that we are all caught up on the timeline, let's talk strategy. Given the apparent lack of U.S. organization here, let me take a step back and try to articulate what the administration is trying to do, because they are trying to do something, and then we can discuss the strategy that Rodriguez may be trying to respond with. In the immediate aftermath of Operation Absolute Resolve, I offered two possible interpretations of what happened. One, the United States is just extremely good at conducting special operations like this, and so Trump ordered it. Or two, the Venezuelan military was working in collaboration with the United States to surrender Maduro, and afterward the brass would help implement a smooth transition so as to maintain its position in the new government. Well, very quickly we learned that it was the first option. It seems that U.S. intelligence had recruited at least a mole or two, but this was not a coup. I think it is worth highlighting an interesting dynamic in how we arrived at this situation. Right now, there is renewed focus in fighting major power wars, not only due to the obvious motivation coming from Ukraine, but also the less publicly watched rising threat from China. Holding wealth and population constant, the United States is not in as good of a position to fight these wars as, say, Russia, because all of the recent U.S. combat experience comes from Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, if there is one upshot of having spent so much time fighting insurgencies, it is that the United States has gotten extremely good at executing these kinds of surgical extractions. This will become relevant again in a moment. Now, despite the Venezuelan military's lack of cooperation here, it still has not fully placed its bet. Until there are true combat operations against U.S. armed forces, the Trump administration will likely be fine permitting leadership to continue into the next regime. There is no guarantee that they will go down that route, of course, because they still have to worry about how the next regime will feel about all of this, or if Trump one day might change his mind. The same goes for politicians involved in the situation, whom we will focus on in a second, but it is still something to watch out for. Either way, the Trump administration's plan appears to be to keep cycling through however many leaders it takes until one wants to be sufficiently cooperative. Thus, it is not a plan, at least in the sense that the administration cannot clearly articulate whom it will be working with. But the administration does not care about that. It just needs to continue projecting power until someone fits the bill. It may be less coherent of a plan than, say, the Bush administration's attempt to run Iraq, which might be saying something because that was not particularly coherent either. But it comes with the upshot of not having boots on the ground for extended periods of time, and incurring the risks that come along with that. The problem is that controlling a country from afar has always been difficult, and at least for right now, it seems to be the problem that Trump is running into. Actually, that takes us to the most interesting strategic question for the day. What is Rodriguez's plan? Because I suspect that many of her personal friends are advising her to get out of Dodge as soon as possible. The United States cut through Venezuela like butter to get to Maduro. One suspects that Rodriguez does not even have the Cuban Praetorian Guard that Maduro had. The likelihood that she withstands another serious military operation from the United States is close to zero. So is there any way for her to survive this without buckling to the United States? Well, these might be a bit of a prayer, but there are a couple of possibilities. One is to resist, bait the United States into another operation, and hope to trigger another Black Hawk Down situation. This is a reference to the Battle of Mogadishu and the film that has lent its name to the expression. In 1993, Somalia was in a state of war. Actually, that sentence was imprecise. Somalia is always in a state of war. But the important story for today is what happened in 1993. The United Nations was trying to deliver food aid to Somalia. One faction did not like this much, and the United States was attempting to arrest its leader. A noble cause, to be sure. However, a Black Hawk helicopter crashed, and the ensuing battle led to 18 American fatalities, some of whose bodies were publicly dragged on the streets. Clinton was politically castigated for the whole thing. What were U.S. soldiers doing in Somalia in the first place? Most Americans could not even point to Somalia on a map, and that was assuming that they had even heard of the country at all. As a result, the United States quickly withdrew, giving a small-time warlord a victory against the world's only superpower. There are a few problems for Rodriguez, and whoever may come after her, with trying to replicate this in Venezuela. First, according to a source, the Maduro operation only resulted in, quote, a handful of troops sustaining bullet and shrapnel wounds. That is insufficient to cause the public backlash that you need for a Black Hawk Down situation. Second, there is always the risk that fallen U.S. personnel will trigger a rally-round-the-flag effect for Trump instead. The American public may get angry and demand more action, not less. Though I have previously discussed how Trump's lack of public trust creates problems for him there. Another bright spot for Rodriguez is that public opinion polling shows that the whole Venezuela thing is not particularly popular inside of the United States. So you might not want to bet on a rally-round-the-flag effect, but it is still a possibility. Finally, the practical problem for Rodriguez is that you actually have to win the battle for it to matter to you personally. If there are 18 American fatalities, but the mission is successful, it can simultaneously be true that Rodriguez spends the rest of her life in a jail cell, and the United States departs Venezuela for good. That is part of why I suspect her friends might be suggesting that she leave now and not deal with any of these risks later. The alternative strategy is to hope for political pressure in the United States to win out. Democrats are furious about the operation, and many in the Republican Party are not pleased either. Plus you have that aforementioned polling. We will likely get some clarity on the situation this week, as Congress is returning to session, and they may start trying to pass resolutions to curb future U.S. action. I have seen some discussion out there that this should be super easy, because the operation was already illegal. I do not think that these people have a good sense of how American law works. The president has strong drug enforcement powers, and those powers do not end at the shores of the United States. Maduro is facing a federal indictment on drug trafficking charges, notably over cocaine, not fentanyl. But either way, you are not going to get much progress there. The United States used lethal force in the process of arresting Maduro, but US law permits that as long as it is related to the arrest, and it would be hard to arrest Maduro if anti-aircraft systems are shooting at the mission's helicopters. Of course, the United States is also party to the Charter of the United Nations, ratified by the Senate, so it is US law too. You will find few lawyers who will tell you that Operation Absolute Resolve was legal under the Charter. One problem: when there is a contradiction between two laws, the Supreme Court gets to decide which one wins. Good luck to anyone betting on the United Nations. And thus you are looking at a political numbers game, and the numbers do not look good for advocates of change. Republicans control both chambers of Congress, and you need a supermajority to override the president's veto. The opportunity to obtain those numbers would not come until the November midterm elections, when a blue wave might convince enough of the remaining moderate Republicans to side with them on the issue. Remember, Trump will be very weak at that point as a lame duck president. But again, for Rodriguez, I am not sure how good of a solution this is. November is 10 months away, and those legislators will not be seated until a year from now. That is a long time for the song and dance to continue. Good luck with that. Meanwhile, there is no need for luck with Ground News. The 40% discount on a Vantage plan is a sure thing if you go to ground.news/linesonmaps or scan the QR code on your screen. For now, if you want to learn more about the US-Venezuela crisis, check out this playlist that I have on the subject. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.